Hi, and welcome to the first episode of the Rathwulven Talks podcast. I'm your host Ralph, and I'm really happy that you could join me today, and I'm also very thankful that you're about to invest your precious and your valuable time into listening this podcast, because this is a new project of mine. I don't know where this is going to head, but if you have been around on Instagram or YouTube and you know the Rathwulven Bushcraft project, then you already know that I am engaging into bushcraft type of activities, which means wilderness living skills, technically spoken. That includes anything from woodwork to shelter building to navigation, also hiking in a sense, but of course also building stuff like structures, tripods, making spoons, working with hatchets and knives and all these kind of things to basically live in the outdoors, right? And if you're completely new to this podcast and to the channel, then you can also check that out. It's basically anything that relates to life in the wilderness, right? The reason why I'm starting this podcast is a really simple one. I do want to talk about bushcraft related topics like skills or gear and these kind of things. But I also want to have a second channel that's a little more open and a little more accessible for a lot of people, because what I realized throughout the last years engaging in bushcraft and wilderness type of activities is that all too often the entire bushcraft topic is also closely related to other topics in life, such as eco-sustainability or prepping sometimes. Maybe it's also connected to self-reliance or to meditation or to stress relief, sometimes even to psychology or philosophy. And I just want to create a podcast that is open for all these kind of topics, for all these kind of clusters of potential themes that we can talk about, right? So that's it about the channel. A little bit about myself. Well, I originally come from Franconia, which is a province in Germany, southern Germany. And how did I actually get to bushcraft? Well, back in the days, there was no such word as bushcraft. We didn't have that term, but when I was a kid, I was going outdoors and just into the woods, building teepee huts, carving my first fishing rod and all these kind of things. And I also was raised by my grandma, who was a professional forager, as you would call her now. She had a lot of knowledge in regards to mushrooms, in regards to herbs and plants, and I learned a lot of things from her. So I kind of grew up with these kind of things when I was very young. At some point, I moved from Germany to the Netherlands and also moved around in Europe and basically traveled a lot of terrains, such as, for example, Ireland. The Wicklow Mountains would be an example. I went to Bulgaria, I went into the Balkan Mountains, into the Alps, and I've been traveling a lot. I have stayed quite some time outdoors, and that gradually kind of made me develop into what I would like to call somebody who's an advanced bushcrafter. I'm certainly not a professional and I don't know everything. I doubt that anyone knows everything, because bushcraft has different types of manifestations in different parts of the world. But when it just comes to the area that I was traveling and where I was living for a longer time, I did obtain quite some knowledge, and I kind of developed into a more experienced bushcrafter throughout the years, and I started the Rathwulven Bushcraft project, which is basically a free source of information. I'm just sharing what I know. I let other people comment on this so I can learn from them. And I do also engage in other groups, for example, the Bushcraftfreunde, which is a collective of about 9,000 people in Germany. And we're also exchanging our experiences, our knowledge, and just continue growing as bushcrafters, so to speak. Well, besides that, I'm also a fisherman. I would also say that this kind of relates to bushcraft because it's about gathering your own food, or in this case, fishing it. I'm not a hunter though, so I'm always curious to learn about this. If you're a hunter and you're listening and you got something to share, please reach out. Let's have a dialogue and just see whether we can make something happen, right? Next to that, I also just like to do woodwork because I just like to make stuff myself. It can be a spoon, it can be a kuksa, but it can also just be maybe some sort of tripod that I use on the balcony to have beans grow there, for example. I just like to do things myself. I like to be self-sufficient. I like to just make as many things as I can by myself, and I like to be independent from whatever's going on in the outside world. So I don't want to be a person that needs to rely on 24/7 stores, or that needs to, rely on whatever kind of commodity. I like the simple life, and that's kind of like what brought me to bushcraft. And this is also why I'm doing this podcast. So, as far as this is just an introduction to the podcast, what can you expect in the future? I would say a couple of topics, actually, because as I said before, we can talk about skills, but also about experiences. So I might invite a couple of people that are talking about their experience homesteading in Canada. A good friend of mine is from Canada, and she lived in a longhouse way off grid for quite some time, and she has interesting stories to share with you. There might also just be talks, with, let's say, for example, forest rangers from my area. Just exchange opinions, exchange perceptions, try to connect with each other and share experiences and insights so we can learn from each other. There could also be debates, for example. It would be interesting, if I would invite, let's say, a vegan person and a hunter, and then just have conversations about this, about the perception of morale, about the meaning of life, and how hunters look at this, how other people look at this, right? We can also talk about philosophy, what it means to be free, what it means to live out in the wilderness. We can also talk about sustainability, how to protect the environment, how to make sure that we preserve this planet that is so wonderful and is like a living entity, and not just like a dead rock floating through space, but a very smart system that is featuring so many elements that are interdependent and just enable life in general, right? And then, of course, we can talk about anything else that relates to bushcraft, from gear to maybe cutting techniques to, experiences with wildlife to, whatever comes to mind. And I want to have this entire podcast program in a very proactive manner. So I would kindly ask you to share your opinion with me. If you already got a thought like, okay, I would like to hear something about friction fire, or I would like to hear something about how to protect myself from ticks, for example, or I want to learn something about water purification, or maybe you just want to learn something about how to go stealth camping, or what kind of tarp to use, or what you need to be aware of if you're getting into some kind of alpine region and you want to do a longer trip. We can talk about everything. So just leave a comment below. If you're watching on YouTube, just drop some comment there. Or if you're on Spotify, just reach out via the contact buttons and just let me know what you think. And then we can build this podcast together, so you as a listener do have some sort of value in this. You need to get something out of this, and that's what I'm here for. I just want to share what I know. I want to be open to any sort of feedback, even criticism, to suggestions, and then we can all learn from each other, so we all profit from that, right? So that's kind of like the idea that I do have. As far as this goes, I just say we just have a quick talk about the first topic, so you can get an idea of what this could be like. And as a first topic, I just want to talk about my own principle, which is nature first, bushcraft second. This slogan basically defines all of my actions if I go into the outdoors, because it sets this paradigm that nature itself has the highest priority no matter what I'm doing in the outdoors. And that's also kind of like my message that I want to share with the world, because as human beings we cannot be independent in the sense that we cannot be without nature. We will always depend on the forces of this planet. We all need oxygen to breathe. We all need sunlight, even if it's just for creating vitamins in our bodies, right? We all need food. We need organic food. That means fruits, berries, whatever kind of vegetables, even meat. So we're always dependent on other creatures or plants and all these kind of things, right? And it is really important that, especially as bushcrafters, we do realize that we have a key role in preserving all of this. And I think a lot of you can relate to this, because we all love nature, we love how relaxing it is, and we love how it can give us a sense of peace. But I really want to ask if we are doing our best to really preserve what is all around us. Because if you look at the world, then we do see so many cities and so many towns emerge from nothing, and we just put concrete everywhere. And then if we go to the supermarkets, almost everything we can buy is wrapped in plastic. And even if we talk about bushcraft gear, then you get yourself some hyped type of knife, for example, or maybe a hatchet that's currently really trendy, but it's made with a plastic handle rather than a biodegradable wooden handle, and maybe it's packed into 3 layers of plastic, right? Maybe if you are buying a flint steel or whatever kind of device, you're contributing to creating garbage. And of course, this is not only like this when you're buying your bushcraft equipment, but it's everywhere. There's cucumbers and single paprikas which are vacuum sealed in plastic wrapping in our supermarket down the street. And that's just absurd, because let's say there are 100 paprikas sold per week. That means 100 plastic wrappings that just end up somewhere and just caused more pollution, right? And then, of course, we can talk about 1,000 different things, like driving in your car, for example. Cars are a great invention, but all too often I do see people just driving in their cars alone and not taking along their neighbor or so. And then people are even complaining about the gasoline prices, but everybody takes his or her own car and just even drives just 1 kilometer to the supermarket to get the paprika wrapped in plastic, right? And before this all sounds as if I'm patronizing and I'm trying to make you feel bad, I just want to take a step back, because this is not what it's all about. What I mean by this is that we should start reflecting on our own actions, right? And then we become truly sustainable beings, and beings that are in touch with nature, right? It's kind of like the same thing as if you go outdoors and you are walking through a nice pine forest and everything smells like resin and like fatwood, and it's just such a beautiful smell in the air. And we know that we can just harvest a little bit of that fatwood there to get our fire started, and do that easily. And then we sit down and we dig a hole right where all those flat-rooted trees are, and then we start a fire there. And at that moment, maybe not even realizing that we are causing a hazard to that forest. Maybe we're used to building fires for 10 or 15 years, maybe even longer. In my case, I built my first fire about 15 years ago, I think. And that was a fire that was anything but safe. And it's a thing that we can also reflect upon, like, are we really doing our best to preserve nature, and are we only building fires if it's a necessity, or are we also doing this just for fun and doing it in a way that is rather non-reasonable, in the sense that we are just not paying attention to the surroundings properly, to how dry the grounds are, to what the vegetation is, and all these kind of things. And I do see these kind of problems usually with those people that just start off with bushcrafting. For whatever reason, they see a video on YouTube, or they read a blog, or they're just going on a camping trip with somebody and they just realize, like, hey, that's amazing. I want to be in the outdoors. I want to enjoy this to the fullest. And then they go out, which is amazing. I really love that. But they're doing it without any critical thought on their own behavior. Maybe they are just putting up their tarp right where there's a resting place of red deer, And maybe they just don't know how to read the tracks of the animals and read the terrain for the signs. And so they don't know better, but still they are kind of like causing a disturbance to wildlife. Or maybe somebody goes out there and just decides to carve a spoon and chops down a hazel, instead of just using some suitable dead wood, maybe also by not knowing where to find that. This is the thing that I mean, there's always room for improvement, for me as for anyone else. And this is why I want to have this podcast, because we can just reflect on these kind of things, we can learn new skills, we can have an exchange of ideas and hence become both better bushcrafters as well as better in preserving nature. And I hope that this is of interest to you, because that's just my personal style of bushcrafting. I always want to learn more, and I always want to make sure that I'm just a little more unnoticed out in nature, that I leave less of a footprint next time, that if somebody is out there and thinks like, okay, now Ralph made a mistake, that those people tell me that, so that I can improve. And I hope that this is an inspiration for you guys out there to do the same thing. Because again, this is not about judging you personally now as a listener or judging entire groups. It's just an observation. And I just want to contribute something that is to the benefit of all of us. Because if we live by the principle of nature first and bushcraft second, it means that we can live our passion for bushcraft to the fullest, but nature still has the first priority, which makes us part of nature again, rather than us just going out and literally behaving like the axe in the woods, right? So I hope that made sense. This is just my personal view. This was also my introduction of the podcast. I'm going to think about a couple of topics now that I would like to have covered soon. And if you got some remarks in the meantime, again, please just drop a comment below or reach out to me. Just share your view, and let's make sure that we make this a podcast that is of value to as many people as it possibly can get. So I'm going to wrap it up from here. Thanks again so much for giving me your time. I very much appreciate that you're investing this into listening to the podcast. And up until then, I would say just subscribe, stay in touch, and of course have a great time outdoors. Enjoy the day and have a good one. Take care. Bye-bye.